Good afternoon. So wonderful to see so many of you here today. Welcome to the Analytical Corner for the 2024 annual meetings. Now, before we start with the presentations, let me invite the Secretary of the IMF, Mr. Seita Ogata, to come up here and kick things off for us. Everybody, round of applause for Secretary of the Fund.
A very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you so much for coming, especially those of you who have traveled a long way to be here with us today in Washington, D.C. If you joined us last spring meetings, I want to welcome you back. If it's your first time at the fund, welcome to the fund. And to all of you, welcome home. This is your IMF. These annual meetings are on the back of a long fight against inflation, followed by dramatic events, tragic wars, terrible climate events, and a further fracturing of the global economy. With all that, the news seems like no place to go in search of hope. But I think we can find a little bit of hope here at the IMF. This week, we have with us finance ministers and central bank governors from almost every country to reflect on where we are headed, and what to do about it. We are proud that even in this challenging geopolitical context, we can still bring so many of you from all around the world to gather together to build consensus. We are also here to learn from each other, and I am thrilled to introduce some of the best IMF research. Over the next 2 days, you will hear from our young professionals who are at the forefront of shaping future policies through their research. The presentations are pertinent, focusing on topics such as monetary policy, social safety nets, and jobs in Africa. There will be something for everyone, I promise you. Please attend as many sessions as you can, and as the Analytical Corner are meant to be interactive, please engage with comments and questions. Thank you, and I hope you have a very productive week here at the annual meetings. Welcome again.
Thank you very much, Seita. All right, so welcome to our first Analytical Corner of the series. We have got a great lineup for you this year. Our first Analytical Corner is on the transmission of U.S. monetary policy. My name is John Bishop. I work in the Secretary's Department at the IMF. Before we begin, may I please ask you to silence your cell phones. Now, I'm going to invite my colleagues, Joseph Plotzer and Philip Barrett, up onto the stage. They are going to present for about 10 minutes. And then I'm going to open the floor for your voices, your questions for about 15 minutes. All right, and with that, please join me in welcoming Joseph and Philip onto the stage. Warm round of applause, my friends.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Plotzer, and I'm an economist at the IMF's research department.
And I'm Philip Barrett. I'm a senior economist in the fund's Western Hemisphere department. So to start our talk, I'd like to take you back to the summer of 2022. By then, the post-pandemic recovery of the US economy was well underway. And while this was obviously a welcome development, it was not without its own challenges. Notably, inflation had risen sharply to over 5%. It's more than double the Federal Reserve's 2% target. And by the start of the summer, it was obvious that this problem was not going to go away on its own. The Fed was going to have to take action to deal with inflation. Now, most forecasters expected that the Fed would respond by raising interest rates. Normally, this would work by slowing the real economy, reducing growth, and increasing unemployment. This, in turn, should reduce the demand for goods and services and return inflation to the 2% target.
However, this is not what happened. Inflation did fall, albeit with a few bumps on the road. But the real economy did not slow down. Instead, it grew much faster than everyone expected. And looking at unemployment, instead of going up, it actually fell for the rest of 2022. And this is not because the Fed eased off its program of interest rate increases. Actually, it raised interest rates by much more than initially expected.
Put differently, the Fed acted to pump the brakes on the economy. But the economy responded as if they'd stepped on the gas. So this raises an obvious question. Was monetary policy in 2022 somehow affecting the economy differently to before? Now this is really important, since judging the right level of interest rates to balance growth and inflation is the key challenge of monetary policy. In other words, if the economic brakes are not as effective as they used to be, you want to know before you use them again.
However, answering this question is not easy. And the reason is relatively straightforward. There was simply a lot of other stuff going on at the same time. And these other forces could have masked the impact of monetary policy by boosting the real economy. This would make it look as if monetary policy was weaker than before, even if it were not. And in 2022, a lot of other things were going on. For example, the return of workers and shakeout of firms following the pandemic led to a boom in productivity. Likewise, fiscal policy loosened. Immigration surged. And Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent energy and food prices spiraling. All of these forces, as well as many others, both known and unknown, could have mitigated the impact of monetary policy, making it look less powerful than usual, even if it were not.
To return to our metaphor from before, if you see a car failing to slow down, even though the driver is standing on the brakes, you can't necessarily conclude that the brakes aren't working. It could be that there's a tailwind, or maybe the car has hit a patch of ice, or perhaps even a mischievous passenger is surreptitiously pressing on the accelerator. Now, any of these would mean that the car does not slow down as expected, even if the brakes are working perfectly well. So too with monetary policy. A wide variety of other factors could make it look as if rate hikes were less effective than usual, even if they were not.
And so we set ourselves a challenge. Could we devise a way to analyze the data that would allow us to see if the strength of monetary policy has changed, despite so many other possibly unknown forces affecting the data at the same time?
The method we came up with has 3 steps. In the first step, we measure the baseline impact of monetary policy in normal times, pre-COVID. As is standard, we use high-frequency movements in interest rates around monetary policy announcements to isolate changes in Fed policy that are plausibly independent of other macroeconomic circumstances. We then measure how those changes affect a variety of other macroeconomic data to develop a baseline view for how monetary policy affects the economy. Now, what's nice about this approach is it allows us to separate the fluctuations in macroeconomic data into 2 big categories, those due to monetary policy and those due to everything else. This is useful for us because that everything else category accounts for all the other forces impacting the economy, and importantly, without specifying their underlying source.
In the second step, we pretend that starting in 2022, we didn't see the high-frequency interest rate changes, but that we do see all of the other data. We then conduct a thought experiment. We use the work we did in step 1 to back out the change in monetary policy consistent with the macro data alone. This would tell us how much the Fed would have needed to raise interest rates to see the economic outcomes that we actually observe, under the assumption that monetary policy is unchanged from before. In the third step, we then return to the observed high-frequency interest rate changes and compare them to the predictions from the previous step. If the predictions are far enough below what we actually saw in the data, this says that the Fed was doing more tightening than you would have expected just by looking at the data alone. That is, that the effect of monetary policy was weaker than before.
Without pushing our analogy too far, this is as if we had first worked out how much a given pressure on the brakes would normally slow down a car. Second, then observed that car in the real world and computed how hard the driver would have needed to brake to deliver the observed amount of slowing if the brakes were acting as normal, given environmental factors. Third, then compared how hard they actually braked to that prediction. If our hypothetical driver was pushing harder on the brakes than we predicted, given what we observed, we would then conclude that the brakes were not acting as well as normal. Now, this might seem like a bit of a long way round, but the nice thing about this approach is we can account for the impact of other normal environmental factors in that second step, even if we don't specify exactly where they come from. And so our calculation for how hard the brakes should have been pressed is adjusted for exactly these factors.
On the screen, you can see our main results. Here in blue, you see the high-frequency interest rate changes around Fed policy announcements, so the actual data. In red, you see what you would have expected by just looking at the macro data alone, so what we call the implied shocks or implied interest rate changes. Here, bigger number mean tighter monetary policy. You see that for a period in 2022, the blue line is consistently above the red one. This tells us that the Fed was tightening monetary policy by more than you would have expected given the macro data alone. Or in other words, that monetary policy was less effective than usual.
So how likely is this outcome? Is this evidence that monetary policy weakened, or could this picture just be the result of chance alone? Broadly speaking, we're relatively sure that monetary policy weakened in this period, at least for a while. We think there's a pretty low probability that you would have seen this outcome without a change in monetary policy transmission, maybe around a 5% chance. We also think that this weakness has passed. In 2024, the probability that that transmission is unchanged is much higher.
So we have evidence that monetary policy was weaker for a while, but by how much? We find that from March 2022 onwards, monetary policy was probably about 25% weaker than usual. In other words, the Fed would have needed to raise interest rates by 4 times in order to have the same effect that 3 hikes of a given size would have delivered in normal times. Over time, this effect dissipated.
So overall, what are the main takeaways from our work? Well, first, that figuring out the real-time changing impact of monetary policy is simply just hard. There's a lot of other things going on which could give you a misleading answer, and you need to account for those. Secondly, that monetary policy was probably a bit less effective than usual when the Fed started raising interest rates, but maybe not so much as you would have thought at first glance. We think that the Fed would have needed to do approximately 1 extra hike for every 3 it would have normally done. Third, that weakness of transmission has probably passed.
An important unanswered question of our work is why monetary policy was weaker than usual. Is it that the pass-through from labor markets to inflation altered due to the changes in post-pandemic working patterns? Or maybe the increasing relevance of long-term fixed-rate mortgages somehow implied that each interest rate hike had slowed down household consumption by less. We are still working on answers to these questions. Whatever the answer to these questions, our work still contributes to a broader research topic, trying to understand how the impact of monetary policy is affected by economic conditions. The benefit of our approach is that we do not pre-select what economic forces can have an impact here, be it the duration of mortgages or the level of public debt or whatever. What we do instead is simply we look at periods where monetary policy is more or less effective than in normal times, opening up the door for future research explaining why. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph and Philip. Great way to kick off these annual meetings. Okay, so let's hear from the audience. Any questions from the audience? We have colleagues in the crowd with microphones, so if you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. When you ask your question, may I ask you to stand up, give us your name, your affiliation, and a brief question so we can get in as many of these as possible. All right, we have a question right off the bat.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Max. I'm a MBA student at the University of Maryland, and I wanted to ask, what do you think the likelihood of a weakening of monetary policy like this occurring again in the future would be?
So this is a great question, and I think one of the things we've learned from this work is that in order to get to an answer to that question, there's actually a bit more that needs to happen between here and there. As Joseph was saying at the end there, what we do in this paper is trying to identify periods of time where monetary policy is weaker or stronger than usual, and that's an application of our work more generally. There's then a second step to trying to understand, like, systematically, where does that changing strength and weakness over time come from? Now, there has been work that has tried to do that, and much of that work is very good, but one of the limitations of that work is often it presupposes what the factor is that might be driving monetary policy strength or weakness, be it some of those factors that Joseph mentioned, changing trade-off between output and inflation, something to do with finance or the duration of mortgages, those sorts of things. And so that's a perfectly fine approach and has complementary strengths to what we do. But I think what we're doing here is the first step on the road to maybe thinking a bit more deeply about what those fundamental drivers are of the changing strength of monetary policy over time. Once you have an answer to that question, then you can start to think about, well, like in a dynamic sense over time, how does that change and how can we make predictions based on it?
Wonderful, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Okay, we have a gentleman right here. We're bringing a mic to you, sir.
Oh, it's okay, I can just wait.
No, just 1 second. We'll give you a mic. That way the world can hear. Yes.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'm Led August. I'm from the Reserve Bank of Vanuatu. Just by hearing of this, for us to know, have you seen any of this trend in other central banks around the world?
Thank you for this question. Thank you for this question. So let me start by saying that in principle, you can apply this method to any country. Of course, so the limitation is the data you can bring to the analysis, and this, when we talk about high frequency interest rate changes, maybe that's the limiting part, but in general, we can apply this to any country. Next, we didn't look at other countries at this point. But I think what's important to keep in mind is that the situation might be a bit different for other countries. So, be it when the reopening after COVID, how hard the shock was following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and many other things. So in that sense, you cannot one for one, of course, apply the results from the US.
Okay, great. Yes, we have I want to get this side of the audience over here. We have a gentleman there. Yes, please.
All right. Bill Cunningham, Creative Investment Research. This is a tough question. I just want to warn you. Did you look at the impact of decline in ethical standards of behavior at the central bank? And I'm talking about the Federal Reserve president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston resigning under ethical cloud, Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas resigning under an ethical cloud, those sorts of things. Might that have impacted the ability of monetary policy to have the same impact? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to let you guys handle this one, all right?
So I think questions of the form, did you account for this thing or this other thing in the analysis, I think get to the heart of what we're trying to do here. And that's because there's a challenge no matter how many of those things you list. It could be fiscal policy, it could be international circumstances, it could be any number of other things, including anyone else's favorite topic. And the problem with trying to take account of those things explicitly is that no matter how many of those things you write on your list that you take account of, there's always going to be one more thing. And so we wanted to have an approach that was robust to that sort of critique. And so what are we doing that does that? Well, that big list of other things, we don't know exactly what they are, but we do know what they're not. What they're not is the fluctuations in the data coming from monetary policy shocks. And so that takes us back to what I was saying about our method. So in the method, we divide the fluctuations in the data into those due to monetary policy shocks and those due to everything else. And that everything else category, we can't separately disentangle exactly what's going on in there. But as a whole, they have a signature. They have a characteristic imprint on the data, the correlations of the different macroeconomic series we look at. And so in the test period in 2022, we take that characteristic imprint of all those other things and ask, well, what's then left over? If those things were not monetary policy to start with, what's left over, it has to be the impact of monetary policy. And so we compare that to what went before. And so the nice thing about this approach is it works no matter what's in that big bucket of other things. Now, there are some caveats and limitations to that. And I don't know if we're going to confess to all of them today, but that's the basic principle. So to answer the question, is some particular thing taken account of here? Our answer is, broadly speaking, yes, under some limitations, including, for instance, that we see enough of the variation of that factor in the earlier data.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. The gentleman back there has been waiting patiently, yes.
Sorry, my name is Avi from KPMG. My question is, sorry to put you on the spot, but what do you think the prediction on 2025, 2026 interest rate, the US dollar interest rate will be? Which direction you'll think it's going to take? Thank you.
All right, getting into the interest rate prediction game, let's...
Yeah, I will take that. So our work does not directly speak to this question. So let me start with that, maybe. However, I think there is something I want to reiterate, and we mentioned it during the presentation, and that is that, so we find that since 2022, transmission has returned to as it was before the pandemic. So just if you're wondering, is this anomaly still going on, whatever causes it, so we find that starting in 2023, transmission has returned to normal. And that at least, I mean, I don't want to speak to where interest rates are going, but it should definitely have, it should be relevant information if transmission is unchanged or somehow changed from before.
Wonderful. Okay, my friends, our time is drawing to a close. But before I wrap up, I want to send it back to you. What is your big takeaway that you want our audience to leave with from your presentation?
Thanks, John. Let me reiterate the main takeaways from our talk here. The first one is that you need to think carefully how to address other factors affecting the economy when you want to assess if monetary policy is weaker or stronger than before. Second, that we indeed find that for some period in 2022, monetary policy was somewhat weaker than in normal times. And third, that this weakness has since passed. But I'm sure that's not the last word spoken on this topic, and there's still a lot of many other questions to be answered. Thank you again.
Great, thank you. Everyone, round of applause for... And thank you so much for coming. Thank you for your excellent questions. We have another analytical corner right here in 5 minutes. So please either stick around, or if you do leave, thank you so much and have a great annual meetings. Thank you.